My brother-in-law just told my wife he is in love with her. Out of nowhere yesterday, my brother-in-law asked my wife to meet him for lunch, hinting he needed to discuss something important. Before agreeing, my wife consulted with me, wondering if it might relate to my sister, perhaps suggesting they were experiencing marital issues. Although the request seemed unusual, I encouraged her to go and find out. The following day, they met at a restaurant near her office. During lunch, he confessed his feelings for her, declaring his love. He complimented her beauty, described the emotional impact she had on him, and fantasized about how things would be if she were with him, claiming it was love at first sight. Keep in mind, this man is married to my sister and they have 2 children. His relationship with my wife had always been friendly, with frequent texts that were familial and non-sexual. He often communicates similarly with my mom, which made us overlook any possible red flags. I need to make it clear that there is no affair between my wife and him. We share an iPad, and I see all her texts, plus we often check each other's phones, so there's complete transparency in our marriage. My wife, taken aback by his confession, didn't let him continue. She walked out, called me immediately to relay what had transpired, and as we spoke, texts from him began flooding in. He was backpedaling, claiming it was merely infatuation, and that he hadn't meant any of it. After the unsettling lunch, my wife left work early to come home and discuss everything with me. Throughout our conversation, her phone was inundated with his desperate calls and texts. I urged her to answer, and she put him on speaker so I could hear. He was sobbing, pleading with her not to tell my sister about his confession. He claimed that during our recent weekend together, he misinterpreted her playful banter as flirting, thinking they had shared a moment alone in our kitchen. My wife is known for her sharp wit, which he apparently misconstrued as romantic interest. He anxiously inquired if she had told me. I spoke up, confirming I was listening in on speaker. He then began to beg me for discretion. I pressed him to know if this was his first time stepping out of his marriage. He vehemently denied ever cheating before, swearing on his children's lives, insisting his feelings were unique to my wife and pleading for my understanding. I had heard enough. I told him I needed time to think and would contact him the next day. Now, I'm torn. My wife believes we should drive over and inform my sister immediately, but the thought of potentially devastating her and my nieces is overwhelming. The right thing seems to be to tell my sister, yet I'm also concerned about the potential fallout on my wife. It's not her fault, but she might still face resentment from my family. Even if my sister and her husband reconcile, I can't imagine our families interacting as before. This revelation could irreparably fracture our family ties. I loathe what he's tried to do to us, but my primary concern remains the well-being of my sister and her children. I'm at a loss and would appreciate any guidance. Update. Last night confirmed what everyone was saying. I couldn't delay telling my sister. Just after midnight, she called me, shaken, claiming that my wife had tried to start an affair with her husband. He had tried to shift the blame onto her. I immediately told her that wasn't true and that we'd be right over. I also called my parents and my younger brother to inform them of the situation. My parents went to my sister's place to look after the kids, and my brother came to ours to stay with our children while my wife and I headed to my sister's house. When we arrived, my sister was waiting on the front porch with my brother-in-law. He looked defeated, knowing we had the texts and voicemails as evidence. I'm not sure what he hoped to achieve. My wife handed her phone to my sister, who read the texts and listened to the voicemails. Before she could react, my brother-in-law, a firefighter and typically a stoic figure, broke down sobbing. My sister, who has always been strong-willed, told him bluntly to pack his bags and leave as she couldn't bear to look at him. Despite his pleas, she had no patience left for him. After he left, my sister and my wife had a moment alone. Seeing them hug was a relief. Their friendship, which dates back to their college days before I even met my wife through my sister, meant a lot to me, and I dreaded the thought of this incident tearing that apart. Left alone with my brother-in-law, I felt more pity than anger. He apologized, confessing he couldn't help falling for my wife, which I somewhat understood, though it was no excuse. We spent the rest of the night there, trying to make sense of everything. My sister, perplexed, questioned why her husband thought his plan would ever succeed, especially since they hadn't been experiencing any marital issues. She couldn't understand his logic, nor could any of us. My wife, overwhelmed with emotion, assured my sister that she had nothing to hide. She handed her phone over once again, and they went through every text from the last 2 years. There was nothing suggestive. My wife's naturally playful personality shone through, just as it does in her interactions with my mom and younger brother. The only incident she could recall that might have misled him was a moment they shared in the kitchen last weekend. They had playfully jostled for the fridge, and he let her win. But his touch as he reached around her to grab a beer felt inappropriately slow. She regretted not addressing it then, thinking perhaps her silence had given him false hope. Fortunately, my sister held no resentment towards her. The tension escalated when my sister began to scour his MacBook. After guessing his password, she discovered an alarming number of photos of my wife isolated from various events over the years. It was unnerving to find about 50 photos of her in a bikini from a couple's trip to the Caribbean. A rare occasion she wore one due to the adult-only setting. These images confirmed he had been secretly capturing her for years, crossing boundaries without our knowledge. This revelation has shifted our worries to whether this behavior warrants a restraining order, given its increasingly creepy nature. I'll provide an update as soon as we figure out our next steps. Update. I've shared many of your comments with my wife, and knowing that the community sees her as blameless has been a great comfort to her. So, thank you all for that. Unfortunately, the ordeal is far from over. Last night, my sister decided to give her husband a chance to explain himself. She included my wife in the conversation via FaceTime to ensure there would be no dishonesty, and I was also listening in, off camera. My sister recorded the entire discussion for transparency. During this conversation, he confessed to having been obsessed with my wife for years, ever since he first met her. At that time, my wife and I were just dating. My wife and sister have been close friends for a long time, and when my sister wanted her then-boyfriend to meet her friends, that's when he first encountered my wife. Initially, he thought his feelings were purely physical, but over time, he realized they ran deeper. The conversation nearly ended with my sister throwing him out, but she continued to listen. Eventually, she asked what made him think that my wife would ever leave me for him. His response was shocking. He believed there was a mutual attraction and envisioned it starting as an affair that would evolve into something more. The revelation caused an immediate uproar. My wife and sister, both enraged, unleashed a flurry of curses and shouts. The phone call ended abruptly as my wife, visibly shaken and concerned for my feelings, reassured me that any attraction he felt was entirely one-sided. I never doubted her. Even if she had found him physically appealing, I knew she would never act on it. She values trust deeply. Early in our relationship, she made it clear how seriously she takes fidelity. Reflecting on my brother-in-law's actions, I was astounded by his arrogance. I knew he was somewhat self-assured, but I never imagined he would have such an inflated view of himself to think he could orchestrate such a betrayal. Later, I spoke with my sister. She's planning to meet with her lawyer on Monday to discuss legal measures to limit his access to the children, given his detachment from reality. That's all the information I have for now. I'll provide more updates once things start to settle down. Final update. This will likely be my last update, as what follows will mainly be the divorce proceedings. I appreciate all the comments. They've somewhat eased my wife's feelings of guilt. Yesterday, my brother-in-law returned home, not because my sister wants him back. She clearly doesn't. But because legally, she can't prevent him from entering their shared home. They're definitively over, and he seems to have accepted that reality. The lawyer indicated that given his recent behavior, which we've documented, my sister stands a good chance of being awarded full custody. He appears uninterested in contesting this, perhaps a sign of his resignation. My sister is holding up well. Whatever affection she once had for him has vanished, and she's not overly distressed by the end of their marriage. The children are still unaware of the specifics, but the transition may be smoother than expected since he often spent nights away at the fire station. Some commenters speculated about other women, but it seems his fixation was solely on my wife. She has since blocked his number, but the night he returned, he sent her an email from a new account. The message began with an apology but quickly devolved. He claimed he had more to say that day at the restaurant, hinting at unresolved feelings.